right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our Astro Coffee Bookshelf Hangout. My name's Tony Darnell, and I run deepastronomy.com, and we are back again after a brief hiatus over the summer to do different things. Brian had things to do, I had things to do, and now we're back, not doing things. So today, let me pull my co-host up. Dr. Brian Keating is with us and joins us because the purpose of these Hangouts is to introduce you to new books and new publications that have been made available in the world of astronomy and science. And Brian has a wonderful podcast, and YouTube channel. The links of all of that are in the description box of this video. If you're watching this on Deep Astronomy, please follow him and his channel on YouTube. And he has access to some amazing interviews and authors and all kinds of stuff. The most recent of which, well, maybe not the most recent, but the one we're going to talk about today is his conversation with Ann Druyan, the co-creator of Cosmos, and has her life involved in many different aspects of the world of science communication, and she is also the wife of the late Carl Sagan. So welcome, Brian. It's good to have you back. Oh, hang on. Yes, I'm trying to figure out why you're not live. I'm like,
oh, you see me?
The sound is there. Good.
Okay. You hear me?
I believe so.
All right.
Only my volume is low. All right, I'll turn my volume back up.
There, it's louder.
There we go. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Have my volume. That should be better, folks. Okay. Good. My volume is low. Too quiet. Volume up. Oh, thank you, Nuki. Okay, everybody, the volume's up. Stop chatting about it. Okay. Welcome. Okay, back to this. So tell us about your conversation, Brian. Tell us, first of all, we can't always assume everybody's watching every week that knows what we're doing. So introduce yourself, talk about what you're doing, and in particular, the topic of today.
Yeah, so I'm Brian Keating, a professor of physics and astronomy at University of California, San Diego. And I also run the Into the Impossible podcast, which is a production of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. A lot of vowels there, a lot of words there. But the mission of the Clarke Center is really to bring the arts and sciences to the masses, to the lay people. And we have incredible guests on the show. It's an interview show. Typically, there are authors who are my guests, but not always. And in fact, this week I had none other than Noam Chomsky, the most cited academic in human history, just because he came about during the 20th century and the advent of media. But I think his citation count is 1 million or so, which is 100 times what mine is. So we had an amazing conversation, which you can find on my YouTube channel, which is just my name here, Dr. Brian Keating. And I'll put links to it. And we had a fantastic conversation this week, including the linguistics of communicating with alien species, if you can believe that. He's the father of linguistics, essentially, cognitive science, professor at MIT for 60 years, and was gracious enough now to take some time out of his very active retirement, or maybe he's still actually quite active at University of Arizona, where he is currently located. And we talked for almost 2 hours. So I'll put a link to my channel, and people can go over there from your channel, check that out. But this week, I published an interview, or actually it was last week, with Ann Druyan, who is the author of many books. Cosmos Possible Worlds is her latest book. And it's based on the series Cosmos, which is now the implementation that's called Cosmos Possible Worlds is the 3rd season, they're calling it. There's a lot of time between seasons. It's not like binge watching on Netflix. First season was 1980 with Carl Sagan. Season 2 was in 2014 with Neil deGrasse Tyson as the on-air host. And he will return in the fall in September 23rd, I believe it is, for a reprise as the host in Cosmos Possible Worlds. Allegedly, you can stream it now. But I talked to Ann Druyan for an hour and a half or so about a month ago, and we just had an amazing conversation about this book. And so I really want to get into this book and some of the novelty that I found in it, and also the kind of standard questions I always ask of my guests. In particular, this time was nice because she's the first time we've had on a mother-daughter duo. We had on Sasha Sagan. You and I talked about that about a month ago. I had her on Mother's Day, and I had Ann Druyan on around Father's Day. but it was nice to have the first mother-daughter duo, and I made sure to make a reservation for Ann Druyan's daughter. Sasha has a daughter named Helena, and I'm already pre-booking her granddaughter on the show for 2037. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, well, tell us about the book then.
So the book is really fascinating. It's one of these books. It's actually, you can get it relatively easily available, even though the book is, the series is not out for several months. You can get it in one of two ways. You can buy it yourself, or you can enter a contest that I am running, and I hope people will do this. I'm going to put a link to the contest. So I'm running a contest, a giveaway for this book, and it's very simple. You can get a bunch of a bunch of entries in this contest to get a free copy of this book shipped to you. Unfortunately, it's only for U.S. residents or APO post office boxes. But this contest is really to get people excited about this series that's coming up. And best news of all, Tony, she's agreed to come to UCSD for an event, possibly around the launch of Cosmos Possible Worlds on National Geographic and Fox this fall. So I couldn't be more pleased with the way the conversation turned out. So I really encourage people to enter the contest, and also to stay tuned for this incredible opportunity to win this book. So what does the book cover? It covers the many different ways in which the word, possible worlds could be interpreted. So one of those is actually physical other Earths, other life-supporting planets that it may exist, may have existed in the past. We talked last June, about this famous paper with 36, and we were both steamed that it wasn't 42 possible civilizations.
Yeah.
That
well,
my
within
friend,
the error bars, you can say 42.
Right. And that was this calculation by Christopher Consolis, who's a friend of mine, about worlds that could have existed or might exist now, with the nearest one having a maximum probability of being located something like 17,000 light years away from Earth. So actual planets in which life could exist. And then notions of life that has existed perhaps previously on planet Earth. And then the last time, which she didn't really get into as much, although she thought it was a fascinating thing to talk about, was the actual possible worlds that Carl Sagan has inculcated through the inspiration that he's had for millions of us around the world to pursue astronomy, wonder, the scientific method, and in particular her children, Nick and Sasha, who are actually co-producers or participants in the Cosmos series. So I call them the first family of the Cosmos because they're really such incredible intellects.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They certainly are. That's certainly true with introducing the cosmos to people. That's most definitely true. So, what is the second thing that you were talking about, of the meaning of possible worlds? This idea.
Yeah.
What was that again? Because I caught just a part of that phrase, and I want to make sure I understand all of it.
It's sort of, thinking about your children or the people that you inspire in your life, if you don't have children, to be interested in these grand topics in the universe, the topics including looking for life elsewhere, but also inculcating values in people, and sort of this ethical will concept that I always ask all my guests about. So
that's sort of like it's a possible world in the sense that it's changing ours.
It's a possible world in that it's children come into the universe kind of as these tabula rasa, these blank slates that we can influence. Also, they can be independent, obviously, and they can be completely different from us. But how do you inculcate values that are important? I propose to Ann that's the only form of time translation or teleportation that we have. We can communicate certain values to our children and to our ideological offspring. If you don't have children, I could loan you some if you need some. I got a bunch, but if but the point is, how do you continue to do good by inspiring people with the values? And everybody on this channel highly values science and the scientific method, and how to inculcate that in future generations is a legacy that can nucleate a possible future world.
Yeah, but you could also argue that, you're right about when you say everybody watching this channel is probably really into science and its methods, but it could also be argued that a lot of damage has been done, and maybe even a contraction of the interest and trust in science. And one of the things I'm very interested in hearing from someone like Ann is, what does she think? And maybe perhaps you talked about this. What does she think about the current state of respect that science has among just the general public, not the people who are interested in science, but just everybody? There seems now more than ever a need to listen to what scientists have to say, and yet I would argue that science communicators are failing, and they're failing badly at getting at this possible world that she's alluding to. This value, promoting the values and of critical thinking and of all the things that comes with science. What did you get a sense from your conversation on what she feels about the current state of
Absolutely,
that?
Yeah. I mean, this is a huge theme on the Cosmos second season that we talked a lot about, how the scientific method works. Is there even a scientific method? And if so, how does that work to kind of fan the flames of incipient curiosity in non-scientists? Look, there's way more non-scientists than there are scientists.
That's exactly right.
But everybody has curiosity, and it actually is. I did a podcast with a guy named James Altucher, who's a well-known, podcast kind of self-help guru, financial guru, and he was on my show for 3 hours. That's going to come out soon on my channel, Dr. Brian Keating. But the thing that he brought up to me, it's kind of a throwaway line. He said that adults laugh 5 times a day. Kids laugh 300 times a day. So somewhere along the line, 60 times, of our humor is cut out by the time we get to become adults. And I made the connection between that and curiosity. I drive my kids to camp. Finally, Gavin Newsom's allowed us to send our kids to camp in certain circumstances. And in 20 minutes, I have 2 kids in the car asking about 80 questions. And I thought, I never get questions from lay people, very rarely compared to that. Like one car ride trip commute to their camp, I could have all the questions that an adult might ask in a month. And so what her job is very uniquely suited to do. She's an excellent communicator. She makes the point she is not a scientist. She's sci-curious, and she's been an ambassador to science. So one of the beautiful things about this book, you can get it, as I said, for free if you win this contest, if you enter in the link that I'm putting in the chat. But the book is actually a work of art. It's sort of a small coffee table book. I usually hate.
Let me make you big. If you
make me big. Inflate me to the size of my ego. We have wonderful illustrations here that are uniquely, displaying the glory, the beauty of the cosmos. And that's a vector, right? A vector to having children appreciate the cosmos, involve these things that actually Carl was responsible for. So she goes through his kind of history and how he was inspired by these grand themes in the 30s, hearing Albert Einstein, one of the first, if not the best, popularizers of science. He was not only a genius and a great scientist himself, he was actually one of the first communicators of science. And what they do beautifully in this book, which is like a coffee table book, but not as an insult, it's just physically beautiful. There's no way somebody can pick this up and not get drawn in by some of the images here. This is not a nebula, What is this relevance to possible worlds? Well, it has to do with the hydrothermal vents that could produce organic compounds that may turn into inorganic compounds. There's archaeology in here, and the mixture between high tech and there's paleontology. There's looking at extremely high tech, including her description, as we talked about in the interview, of her brainwaves were recorded and encrypted onto the Voyager Golden Disc album. This is now on a 5 billion year long journey. And what were her brainwaves processing? Were they processing, the Lorentz transformation? No. She was thinking about her newly incipient love for Carl Sagan. They had just met in 1970 something, and they had been falling in love. And she developed this idea that they would record her brainwaves in an EKG machine, and then that EEG machine, and she would use those brainwaves. They were encrypted on this record, which I pointed out was really the first example You ever heard of world music? It's a little different than elevator music, but it's we take it for granted now. You hear it like South American pan flute. You hear that. She was really part of the first effort to ever make world music. And why? Because they wanted to make a time capsule, and they wanted to send this time capsule out into the universe. And it was as much for the benefit of the future aliens that find it, so that they can know the menu of what they're going to eat when they come. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully they're not going to do that, Tony. But it's as much for them as it is for us, and what is meaningful for people on Earth. So she's an artist. She's a poet, but she's the most educated kind of lay person in the sense that I've had the benefit to meet, even more so than her daughter. Actually, it's incredibly impressive person.
I completely believe that. I remember when they were putting that together in the late '70s, when Voyager was launched, and we had gotten all the media about it. I was still in high school at the time, and I thought it was an amazing idea. And of course, it was also that same couple. I think I don't know what role Ann had in it, but of course, Carl pushed really hard for Voyager to turn around and take a look at Earth when it was way far out there. And that was because they got it. They understood what you had to do with science missions like this. You needed to inspire and give perspective of our place in the universe, and he had at his disposal these tools: the Viking lander, the Voyager probes. He's been involved in all kinds of books, of course, and TV shows. But the beauty of what they did is they were such original thinkers, both of them. One of the things being this record that you just showed, and encrypting it with technology of the time. I think it's an acoustic record, right? It came with a needle, a special needle that had to be played on a turntable. So you had and there was instructions on that somewhere on the plaque that showed you how to put it together, and you had to play it like an LP. Now we don't even do that now. In fact,
Larry
we need instructions.
In the chat says that his signature is on the golden disc. I wonder how that came to be. But maybe Larry, you can put in the comments how that came to be. And
definitely, I did not know. That's really cool, Larry.
That's
how'd
amazing.
You do that? And of course, that's a tradition. They're still going on. NASA lets you electronically put your name into various rovers and stuff that go to Mars. So they
were the first, right? And New Horizons, they beamed a bunch of signatures, etc., out into the universe, out to New Horizons on the occasion of it making contact with Pluto. How
active is Ann in social media? I don't think she's that. I mean, I follow a lot of people. I don't think she
not
is.
At all.
She? Right?
No, she has no presence.
What? Does she have? Is that a statement about how she feels about social media, or can she just not be bothered?
I think she's a certain demographic, that's not quite as savvy as others. It's funny because her son Nick is on Twitter, and then he tweeted out a tweet from someone named Denzel Washington. And Denzel, but it's a parody account, so he didn't realize it even. And I was realizing because I heard an interview with one of my chief competitors in the podcast circuit is, of course, Oprah Winfrey. I mean, she's always looking over her shoulder at me. She has a wonderful interview with Kevin Hart, the comedian, and he was kind of like making the distinction between new media people like himself and then people like in the old guard like Denzel Washington. And then I come up on this quote by Carl Sagan's son Nick, retweeting someone named Denzel Washington, who's not really Denzel Washington. So it was just funny to kind of have this. I think we'd all be more productive if we were, she doesn't need to, she's the co-producer, she's the writer, she does so many things. And they have a fourth season, I am told, in the works as well. And even longer into the future. And this partnership with Neil is just going gangbusters for both.
Right, it seems to be really taking off.
He does the social media. There's no way to be. I made the point to somebody recently because he's a friend of a friend. He was like the advisee of one of my close colleagues at Princeton for his postdoc, I believe. And I was making the case to him, that he is the most famous scientist in history, Neil deGrasse Tyson, because. No, he is.
It still goes to Einstein. I don't care.
No, but I'm just saying in terms of people that know about him. Yeah, I mean, Einstein didn't live during the era of media popularization that we have today. In terms of like who can pick up, who would a scientist be, who would recognize it? Yes, Einstein might be more, and he's certainly more of an actual practicing scientist than Neil is, as Neil fully admits. Yeah. But nevertheless, I'm just making the point that social media has taken scientists into the realm of celebrity.
Okay, this is a question for you personally, Brian, not about Ann or not for Ann or what she might have said, but
Yeah.
What do you think about the role of social media in our ability to communicate science? And do you think personally that if Carl were alive now, he would be active on social media?
I think he would. I mean, the foundation that he started, the Planetary Society, Bill Nye is the current director of that. He's
Right.
extremely active. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was one of Carl's, kind of motivations for getting into popularizing science. I think he would be. The question is, how much did he suffer for being the Neil deGrasse Tyson of his day? Because unlike Neil, again, Neil fully admits this. I'm not telling tales out of school. I love Neil and everything he does, even though he won't return calls to be on my podcast, but that's another side. But someday I'll get him. Someday I'm sure I'll get him. I spoke at the Hayden Planetarium, where he is the director,
Right.
3 years ago, and ran the planetarium. And I was just really hoping to meet him. I was hoping to meet my kid's favorite astrophysicist, but it didn't come out to be. So, when you look at someone like Neil, versus Carl was an actual practicing, day-to-day scientist, writing hundreds of papers and books and editing and starting societies. I don't know how he found the time, but thank God he did, because he didn't live that long. Unfortunately, he died in the late 90s, but he accomplished a tremendous amount. But one thing that I know sort of irked him was the fact that he never got elected into the National Academy of Science for the work that he did in basically creating the fields of astrobiology and contributing to studies of brown dwarfs, working on nuclear, proliferation, disincentivization. These things that he did were so magnanimous and so important for all of science that all of us believe nowadays that he should be. And in fact, NASA, of all their fellowships that have names after them, his is one of the very few: Einstein, Hubble, and Sagan. And there hopefully be a few more, as time goes on, for women and other underrepresented groups, hopefully. And Carl is up there in the pantheon, and not because he was a popularizer, because he was an amazing scientist.
That's true.
He suffered for that. And nowadays, we talked about this. Did Carl really suffer, from going through this, from kind of being this ambassador? And would he have traded it? And I asked her about, and she said no, because look, at the end of the day, if I write a monumental paper, my paper, along with my Bicep 2 colleagues, that set the world on fire, that I describe in my book, Losing the Nobel Prize, as direct evidence for the first time of cosmic inflation, the one whose results we later had to, or the claims we later had to retract, that paper got 1,500 citations. According to Ann, over 1 million times more people saw the series Cosmos, the second season, and we'll see this one. In other words, 1.5 billion people around the world. It's just unbelievable, the impact that he had.
Agreed. And I would say the question of his suffering scientifically may have occurred, but it certainly wouldn't, I don't think, happen today. And I also believe that had he lived longer, he'd be in the National Academy right now.
You think so?
Oh yeah, I do. And he was also, as some of the biographies I've read, a little miffed about with Harvard at not giving him tenure as well. But he did all right for himself.
Yeah, certainly.
And like we've talked about before, I followed Carl quite closely in the '80s. I was a big fan of his, and because of Cosmos, and it was, he had a lot of quirks. I saw him on TV a lot, and he made a lot of blunders on national television and interviews, things like that got him in a lot of trouble, because he was very much against nuclear weaponry, I should say, and was very much worried we were going to wipe ourselves out from that. And so he was also politically quite active. He was at demonstrations at Rocky Flats in Colorado. I learned about that because it was just down the road from where I lived, and I tried to see him. And there was all kinds of really cool things that he did. He had I think today, I agree with you. I think he would be in social media, and I think he'd be a rock star at it. I think he'd be, every bit as big as NDT is now. And I guess one thing I want to try and get out of you, though, is before we have to. How much time do you have, by the way?
I got plenty of time.
Oh, good. So okay, it would sound like a 3:30 cutoff or anything.
No, I can go to the hour.
All right, because I'm starting to get upset.
Okay.
At the level of distrust that I'm seeing in our lives right now. I mean, even you just today said Gavin Newsom is letting us now go out and take our children out. You said that in a way that was like you're finally being let free, as if you're feeling a little bit tread upon yourselves. And I get the frustration that people have with the way things are right now. But what science is saying isn't just made up, and I think, and we've gotten to the point now where most people in the world, people watching this channel notwithstanding, don't believe it. They just, they don't believe science. And I actually think very strongly, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, that social media has damaged science, in particular by the communicators themselves. And I can go into why I think that, but I would like to know instead what you think about that comment.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of being tongue in cheek, but for example, Eric Weinstein, who's a great fan of many of the listeners here, I mean, he went off on Dr. Anthony Fauci about 3 weeks ago for this admission that there was basically a secondary motive behind telling people not to wear masks in the beginning, and that was to preserve masks for the much more needed and important healthcare professionals. So on one hand, he was saying critical of Fauci. Now I didn't take a position on this, but and then he's a renowned scientist. It's not like he doesn't believe in that the Earth is round, but in other words, I think that the notion that right now in the midst of this pandemic, we were planning to have an eclipse trip down to Chile in early December. And people are asking me, the tour guide company that I was supposed to work with and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, what do you think we should do? Should we ask for the money back now? I'm like, why are you asking a physicist? It's not like I have any special vector or knowledge about how this particular virus. And you know what the problem is, Tony? And I hate this about my fellow scientists, because when I give a talk, I'll often give a talk at a Lions Club, a Rotary Club, and I love it. I love doing that because it's like, these are just, real people, and they're so interested in science. But then at the end, the Q&A, they'll say, well, global warming, tell me, do you feel it's like the evil oil companies? Do you feel like it's the tree huggers? And I'll say, you know what? I hope when you have an environmental, scientist who comes to give a talk at your Rotary Club, I hope that when you ask him, what do you think is more likely, the Big Bang or the cyclic model of the universe? I hope that he or she says, why don't you ask a cosmologist about that? Because I have a feeling they wouldn't answer that. So I always say, look, I understand the microphysics, but there's much bigger problems. And you know what, Tony? I've seen this also in the whole Black Lives Matter debate. And I'm not going to get into politics here, but I will say, I do have a video from Dr. Sylvester James Gates, who's the first Black PhD from MIT to graduate in theoretical physics in the 70s. He's the upcoming president-elect of the American Physical Society. And he has a video blog on my channel, Dr. Brian Keating, on YouTube. And he talks about the progression of society with regard to African Americans and the discrimination that he's faced and that progress that's being made. And I feel like, and I asked him about this, why are they asking physicists about how to make social policy and defunding the police or extra fund? They shouldn't be asking us. We're not experts in that, Tony. We're experts in our subject matter expertise. So you know what we did? Instead, we said, how can we make fellowships that go for historically Black colleges, for students to participate in the Simons Observatory, to work in cosmology at the Flatiron Institute, to learn from the greatest and be partners with us, not students, they're partners with us. So we're working with the American Physical Society, the National Society of Black Physicists, to do the only thing that we can do, which is to make physics more inclusive, but through physics, not through like, Brian Keating, you give about what I think about social policy. No, You should only care about what I say about cosmology.
That's right. And it's easy when you're a science communicator to get caught up in this. You're being asked your opinion on all kinds of stuff, and you feel like, I've got an opinion on this, so let me give it.
Look, Tony, they asked Einstein to be the president of Israel, the first president of Israel. He said, what are you talking about? That's called the halo bias, the halo effect. Just because he's smart in one realm doesn't mean anything about his capability and capacity in a completely orthogonal direction. I really dislike that.
I know. And so let me just highlight Simon Farmer's comment. I've got 60 science YouTube subscriptions that disagree with your notion that science communicators are failing. Well, okay, let me ask you this, Simon. To whom are those 60 channels talking to? Is it all the are they all preaching to the choir? And when I say science communicators are failing, I'm not talking about doing a good job communicating science. I'm talking about they're failing when they talk about things that aren't about science, and they can even get downright belligerent to those who don't agree with them. Look at all kinds of channels. Thunderfoot comes to mind. Everybody loves him, but he's belligerent to people who don't believe in what he in science of any kind. And there are, there's tons of other examples out there of people who are great at science communicating, but feel the need to talk about things. Richard Dawkins, how about him, right? Let's talk about religion. In what way is he even remotely qualified to do that? And what that does is it ruins your credibility among those who don't know anything about science credentials, right?
That's right.
And why would they trust you if you're going to sit there and attack them for some? Let's say I know nothing about science, but I have emotionally charged beliefs about science and the world and religion. And here's this scientist coming at me as if I'm an idiot. Am I going to trust this guy? Hell no. Neil deGrasse Tyson's done it. And all the really, really big science communicators have felt the need to denigrate those who are not just, stomping on the footpath of science. It's called scientism, and it's a problem. And that's the point I'm trying to get at. And I believe that the current state of affairs, for what universe is wearing a mask a political issue, right? And yet here we are. How did we get here? And so we got here in part because of a distrust in science. And I'm trying to ask Brian where he thinks that comes from. And by extension, Ann Druyan, and it sounds like that you never really asked that. Did you talk about that with her at all?
Science?
The level of distrust in science in our culture today.
Well, I think she views it in somewhat similar fashion to the way that I perceive it, which is that, scientists have an obligation. I believe scientists have an obligation to communicate what they do. But, it should also be taken with the astronomer's version of the Hippocratic Oath. In other words, do no harm. So you can point to peer review. You can point to studies. The problem that I think happens is that, let me take another step back to where you talked about social media. So I had this conversation with, I won't use his name, but he's basically one of the most famous scientists in the world and a theoretical physicist. And he said to me, that he would never go on Twitter. He would never go on Facebook because he knows he has new ideas that are incipient. They're about to come out. They're in a tentative state. And he knows that he or his postdoc or his graduate student, she could be up there on the board at a seminar and people taking pictures of it, posting it, oh, this is stupid. The universe began like this. The universe ends like that. And it could be extremely detrimental to the fanning of these flames that for theoretical ideas, they need to be nurtured for a little bit, especially when they're iconoclastic, when they're breaking the maverick mold of what the the orthodoxy is currently. And so I think there is this problem. Look, like any tool, I think Ann and others believe that there could be good or bad use of technology that is, in the form of social media. I mean, first of all, to get stuff like this out, I have a big announcement at the end of today's talk that I'll present.
Cool.
I couldn't get that out, to millions of people if I was in the past. Again, if I get that paper that announced the detection of gravitational waves imprinting the cosmic microwave background polarization and losing the Nobel Prize, that got 1,500 citations, as I said. You're lucky on a normal paper is considered renowned if it has 500 citations. If only 500 people read my book, I mean, I don't care about the financial aspects of it, but I feel like I'd failed in a certain sense, not because I really want to be popular, but because I want these ideas to be influential so that I can hopefully inspire the next generation. And I always use that idea. So to the extent that, my ideas have influenced people from Pakistan to Uganda to, Chile to California, I take that as the number one metric of what I'm doing. And then in science, I already have metrics. I already have promotions or awards or citations. It's very highly monitored because we say, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So it makes sense. But I agree with you. But the problem is, do you create alternative to you? Do you create like, here's the party, here are the facts, and then you rely on popularity of an idea? I mean, don't forget, if you had asked people 100 years ago, is the universe, all 97% of scientists would agree the universe is infinitely old. Does that make it right? No. But I think, is there room for denialism? That's where you get to a much more slippery slope in that, does free speech apply to everybody? Of course, but, should some ideas receive more attention than others? I like to think that, if it does no harm, it's okay. But you're making the point with respect to masks, the science seems to be quite clear. So perhaps it does do harm.
Well, no, the point that is a symptom of a much bigger problem. And in putting it back to me, the science communication that happens is generally of a very high quality when it's done, within its intended audience. But you're never going to get the broader these people, all science communicators, we're all basically looking at the same 10,000, 100,000 views, right? We're getting the same people. We all subscribe to the same science channels. We all watch the same videos because we love science. We want to learn more. We want to expand our knowledge. It's the ones that manage to break out of that, the NDTs, the Richard Dawkinses and the Sam Harrises that can get out there beyond that bubble and start saying things. They're the ones doing the damage. And Carl Sagan would have been one of those types of communicators. Everybody knew Carl. And I don't think he would have been guilty of that. He did not. He was not a religious person. We know that from his works. But I cannot see him going out there and calling people who believe in God fools or just, Bronze Age idiots and all of this other stuff. I can't imagine him doing that. And that's where the damage starts. And then, of course, we have politics and all the other crap that comes out of this today. All of it related to a lot of factors. So I'm oversimplifying it a bit.
Well,
but
it was,
one thing.
I mean, it was one thing that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing you were saying that I agree with, but I think you're conflating, and that is, you talk about your paper citation numbers, and then you compare it with who you can reach in a public general science book. You are actually engaged in two very different activities, both of which are hugely important. When you write a scientific paper and it gets refereed and put into a journal, you are building on the canonical science knowledge of science. Yeah. Your paper is now part of the scientific canon. That's amazingly huge and a huge deal, but it's also a huge it's a huge contribution. So that body of knowledge has gotten so big that it's you are only appealing to other experts like you who know what you're talking about. You don't take the time in your papers to define your jargon, right? You assume the reader knows what all of this is, right? What polarization of gravitational waves and all of that kind of stuff, baryonic acoustic oscillations. You don't bother defining what those are. You just assume the reader knows. And so you wouldn't expect, in that respect, a huge audience unless your paper is truly a discovery of some kind,
renowned.
You know what I mean. Things like relativity, or when they did the Type 1a supernova acceleration of the universe, stuff like that, right? Well, those by definition are going to be few and far between. But your other work, the stuff that when you wrote Losing the Nobel Prize, you were appealing to a completely different group of people. And I don't think it's fair to compare those.
No.
I think you, by definition, need hundreds of thousands of readers on one hand, where in the other one, you're okay. If 500 people look at your paper and think it's good and cite it, you're doing pretty damn good, as you said. And considered authoritative.
Yeah, well, that's really good. And I hope all 100,000 listeners out there do buy my book because my kids at camp is pricey and I have to keep them in masks. But in all seriousness, yeah, it's true. Sometimes I'll spend 6 months on a single caption to a figure in a scientific paper, whereas I wrote the book in about a year. It was a tremendous amount of work. And the difference is with a book, it's all on me. I didn't have a ghostwriter. I didn't have a helper. I had helpers in a certain sense, people doing illustrations, which are all custom, but I had to commission them. I had to pay for them. It didn't come from the publisher. A little known fact is the publisher doesn't pay for anything. They give it to you. You get an advance. You're supposed to pay for it yourself. And so there's original artwork. And so there's a lot more self-ownership. Like I really own that book, and it's not like I can say, "Oh, I made a blunder. Let me blame my graduate student."
And it wasn't peer reviewed. It was just your editor saying, "Yeah, this
exactly.
is good. You spelled everything right. Let's go."
Exactly right. So it goes through editing, which a lot of things don't. In a proposal, it doesn't get edited. You typically submit it, and then if there's errors in it, so be it. But what was interesting, and I want to get back to the conversation with Ann.
Okay.
A couple of things really struck me about this conversation. I really want people to go view it, so you can view it in the description on my channel.
In my channel, the description.
Awesome, great.
Box.
So we talked about two different things. One was this concept of rivalry in science. There were two different rivals that Carl Sagan had the opportunity to work with, and this chapter is called "The Man of a Trillion Worlds." It's the one with this Hubble Deep Field, and there's two different astronomers, or one's a physicist, one's an astronomer. And there's a quote from Dr. Gerald Kuiper, who's the famous Kuiper belt and the Kuiper, and Carl was writing to him about an offer to become a partner, an intern with Dr. Kuiper at McDonald Observatory in Texas. And so he accepted this thing in 1956 when he was 21 years old. And it turns out that this Kuiper was a huge rival of a man who was at UC San Diego named Harold Urey, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering what's called the deuterium, the heavy partner of ordinary hydrogen that has a proton and a neutron. And he talks about how these two men were kind of like bitter rivals with one another. And I won't spoil the fun, but kind of going back and forth. And how did Carl manage? It's kind of like he was like the child of divorced parents. Like he was going between these two eminent scientists, one a Nobel Prize winner, one the namesake of a whole class of planetoids way out in the solar system that have so much impact on literally on how life could have formed on Earth. And how Carl was influenced by it, but the human side of him, and like, how do you deal with that? You've got two different offers. It could be, my kids I got invited to a birthday party, but now a more popular kid invited. Like seeing how Carl wrestled with this, it's just so touching and personal. I really love this chapter, and not just because it has this connection to UC San Diego through Harold Urey, who our chemistry department is named after. But it also makes this point, that these eventually they would come together in a sense and united through their scientific child, which was Carl, and that Carl would start the first generation of interdisciplinary scientific research. It's called Icarus, which kind of blended astronomy, astrophysics, planetary science, geology, atmospheric science. So this is in the 70s. It's just amazing that Carl did so much, and then how this later led to work that ended up on Apollo and going to the moon, the famous iconic footprint of Buzz Aldrin on an alien world, and how both of these men had these bitter rivalry between them. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just in terms of scientific communication. Another connection to UCSD is our own Mario Molina, who won the Nobel Prize in part for his work on chemistry of the ozone layer, et cetera. And how Carl's work and the work of Mario Molina showed that it was possible to basically eliminate CFCs, carbon fluorocarbons or hydrofluorocarbons, and get rid of them in commercial applications. And that science, through communication, through partnership, as you're saying, really gives Ann hope that we can do stuff in terms of, preventing or runaway global warming. So it's interesting that Carl was at the nexus of so many of these different things. And he really played the role of, pacifist or peacemaker, and certainly advocating, against ever approaching the horrors of nuclear winter, as he coined the term, and popularized this as only he could. So I think, there aren't any people really like him. I mean, Neil is wonderful, but Carl just had this blend that I can only aspire to, as you said, doing the real science that I try to do, and nucleating the next generation of scientists, my graduate students who are like children to me, and then also inspiring the public. Because, I often say, like, you guys out there are paying my taxes one way or another, either through research grants to the National Science Foundation, or if you're in California, you're paying part of my salary as a state employee. And I hope to earn your business. And I'm not making profits on any of my sales, but hopefully what I'm doing is providing knowledge and wisdom that you can take to heart and benefit from all the hard work that you guys put in your money and your resources. to give and trust to me and your children. For those of you who have students here or elsewhere, people like me, it's just the greatest gift to be able to be a scientist. And that's the thing that really came through, is how much he loved what he did and how tragic his life was cut short. It chokes me up.
Well, you know what I wish you'd do, Brian? I wish you would. I mean, the work you're doing in science is great, and you're doing amazing science communication too. But I wish you'd run for office, because we need politicians who think like this, right? We do. We need them to understand not just how science is done, but the way, the mechanics of it, but also the necessity of the funding and why we need the funding.
Tony, it's so funny. I keep my channel politically neutral, as I had on Noam Chomsky. I have on people on the left, on the right. Hopefully on some average.
Noam Chomsky.
I know. Hopefully on average, it'll average out to be neutral. But I had on the two leading candidates for mayor of the city of San Diego on July 4th, appropriate for July 4th. And I had on these two candidates, Barbara Bree and Todd Gloria. They're both friends of mine. One of them is going to be the mayor of the 8th largest city in America. And I said, point blank, are you going to have a science advisor? Where I didn't ask about, like, what do you feel about immigration policy? I don't care. I'm a stupid physicist. Yeah. I said, look, where's San Diego's future in technology and education and healthcare? And are you going to have a science advisor? And they both had to answer that question. So, that's of interest mainly to people. I've only gotten 100 views on each one of those videos, but I think they're important to see how politicians think. And again, there's 1.5 million people that live here. But to answer your actual request, I have so much more to do in science, and so much that I want to do in science and in popularization and communication to the public. It's just,
sure. I know that, and I know that I'm being, tongue in cheek about it, but I use this as an example of that's where the real difference will be made, I think, in the future. We just need leaders who can lead in a way that makes some kind
and I would work with anyone. I'm hoping to cultivate a brand, as people say, where
be a science
I don't
advisor.
care.
Do that.
Exactly.
Do that.
I want to do that, and I'm open to whoever wins the president, Biden or Trump. I don't care. I am at your service because I am patriotic. And again, I only know science. I don't know, social policy and engineering. But use me as a resource. If they happen to be watching, I'm more than delighted to serve. My patriotic duty would be through what I could do for science and communication of science.
Okay, well, before you have to go, I want to highlight something Hans Milling has said. And thank you, by the way, Hans, for the super chat help. I do appreciate it. Really, every penny helps. So thank you so much for contributing. He's making a comment. We have seen lots of papers come out with results or conclusions before the research was done, and often with some wrong conclusions that was later withdrawn. How often has the new Earth been found, for example? It makes people distrust the papers and the news. And I think you're probably right, Hans, but I would also add to that I think scientists are under a different kind of pressure these days with the funding that Brian just talked about and where it comes from. There is such a rush to get out papers. And Brian, so what do you think about it? Do you think the quality of our science, implied in that comment, is that our science isn't as good as it used to be, right? Our papers are being retracted and they're being corrected all the time. Do you think the quality of science is deteriorating?
I think no. I think the quality of science is increasing and improving. The issue that he's mentioning, which I think is a very astute observation, is the notion of sensationalism and publicity. And because there's such a small amount of research funding and of attention that the public has for understanding especially complex attributes of modern scientific enterprise, that what happens is you have this cycle of funding violence, I call it, where you've got a scientist will be thinking to herself, oh, I got a cool result. And then she might talk to the university press office in her division, physical sciences, say in my case. And then they might take that and say, well, let me take it to the Union Tribune here in San Diego and see if they're interested. And then maybe it gets picked up by a national newspaper. And you saw this with our conversation last month. If that never made it to the Guardian, the 36 alien civilizations, Chris didn't actually, intend for that to happen. But once it started to happen, it's very difficult to resist that. Now, that's something speculative, right? Nobody's going to falsify that and say, actually, Professor Consolis, you're wrong. You should be fired because there's 35 civil, that's never going to happen, right? No. So in part, scientists need to get attention in a good way, not as, publicity hounds, but they really do need to, because if the public stops supporting science, but I think the bigger point that you're making is a good one, that if we undermine our credibility, the whole thing is at risk.
Right.
And so we need to be accountable. And that's why I've proposed, that scientists have a budget of every grant for retractions. Basically, like, we had this big announcement, and it was on the front page of the New York Times and CNN, and there was no coverage whatsoever when we retract. It was on page B17 of the Saturday edition. When we basically had to admit that what we had seen was not what we originally thought it was.
And let's not forget to mention the egregious role the media plays in science communication these days. It is ridiculous how many papers come out, and the scientists who publish, you'll read an article about someone's research, and even the first author is perplexed. What?
Yeah.
How did you get that from what I
and even this
it's a complete
I was talking
misunderstanding of what I'm doing.
With James Altucher about, it's basically, we don't realize this, but behind the scenes of many of these websites where people get news, they're doing what's called A/B testing. They're testing the headline. So in the millisecond that it takes, a cohort of 1 million people to check a website, 500,000 will get one version. So-and-so says, don't wear a mask. So-and-so says, masks hurt you. And then they'll see which one does better. Yeah. And the news is the biggest culprit, I feel, in this and kind of negative attention, circular sense of argument. I do want to mention, are there any more questions? I don't want to skip over any questions.
I didn't see any questions, just some comments.
I saw Larry met both, Ann Druyan. Yeah, so that's how he met. Probably got it on there. Voyager development team, very cool. Fountain pen, he transferred it to gold. That's amazing. Brian Penley saying on my channel about, and Mojo's is saying, science is the politics of scientists. And that's a good point. It's not the science that's in question. It's when science gets politicized or when scientists become political. I find those both to be, every 4 years, mark my words, Tony, in about 4 months, we're going to have an essay in the New York Times from 70 Nobel Prize winners about who we should vote for president. I guarantee it. It's like clockwork every 4 years.
Yeah, well, that goes back to my original point. this business of scientists need to talk about science, and your point as well, right? Why would you ask a cosmologist about global warming? Ask or where you said whether a mask or not. Ask the right questions, because science by necessity has gotten incredibly what is the word, when you're super specialized, I guess, when you really hyper specialization, right? When you do your work in cosmology, you're doing it in a very narrow band, aren't you? You're because you want to get something done. You want to contribute. We know the big picture now. We need to
low-hanging fruit's
all
been
the
picked,
details.
Right?
Yeah. So you can't be an expert on everything. You can be an expert on the thing that you have.
And then when it becomes emotional, it gets dangerous. So I do want to make an announcement that next week and the following week on Tuesday, I'm going to have announcements on my YouTube channel and on my Twitter account, Dr. Brian Keating, for both of those. We're doing an amazing webinar, Tony. By your demand, I set this up, Tony. So you owe me big time.
Okay.
It's going to be with PBS Spacetime Studios, and we're doing a webinar with 7 of the most foremost scientists, physicists in the world about theories of everything. Do we need them? Why are they important? And if so, what would they look like? Are there alternatives? The people that we're going to have are guests that we've talked about in the past: Eric Weinstein, Lisa Randall. We're going to have Sabine Hassenfelder, my best friend Stefan Alexander, James Beecham, who's a particle experimentalist, Lee Smolin, who's a phenomenal influence on so many of us in physics, and Max Tegmark. So we've got 7 of the world's top physicists. So look for announcements. Subscribe to my mailing list so you get an invitation to it. It'll be free, but subscribe to my mailing list to get in it.
To do that, how do I do that? Is it just on your website? Just
I'm going to put it in the chat. But yeah, it's just go to briankeating.com and it will pop up, ask you to sign up, and then I'm going to blast out over the weekend link information for the webinars. There's 2 of them. They'll be on Tuesday afternoon Eastern time, this coming Tuesday, and then the following Tuesday it'll be early in the morning, like 7:30 Pacific time, 10:30 Eastern time. And these are just it's going to be such an exciting thing. And I want to thank you, because you're continuing to press me on, do we need this philosophically? What would it look like? How could you test it or not? is really at the heart of modern physics. And I hope to plan to have another series about the multiverse and many worlds. So people get on the mailing list, get interested in it, and hope to see you there. It'll be free. We're going to have conference proceedings for people that are interested. It's going to be a blast.
That'll be nice.
Look for Tuesday, July 28th.
That's really cool. I'm glad you're going.
I got to make it free.
For it, so
stay tuned, sign up. I'll put the link in now in the chat, and please keep it there. And then enter to win the copy of Ann's book. And you can enter. You'll also get on my mailing list. So please do that. And Into the Impossible is the podcast. Dr. Brian Keating on YouTube, and briankeating.com.
Yep,
thank you, everybody. Looking forward to this next week again. Maybe we'll do a recap of part 1 of the TOE webinar.
Yes, that sounds great. Okay, and you're going to come up with a date soon too, or did you?
The date is July 28th.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry.
And August 4th.
Okay.
So stay tuned for the link details and how you get on it.
So next week and the following
Yeah.
week. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Okay, definitely. So, all right. Well, Dr. Brian Keating from University of San Diego, thank you for taking time out to join us and talk about all the cool stuff you got going on. Because I love talking with you every week. You're easy to talk to.
It's so much fun.
I feel more comfortable. Like I can just sort of yell at you a little bit, and you'll be like, "Yeah, man."
And I'm like your research assistant, right? I'm putting together webinars.
I would. Yes. Doing good work. You're doing good work, son. Right,
Tony. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all the listeners out there. Please keep in touch. Have a safe weekend. Love you all. Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. We'll see ya. Okay, and I will be I'll be signing off too, but I want to thank you guys for watching. We're back periodically here on Thursdays when I can. I just got done with the American Astronautical Society's Glenn Symposium last week. That's what I've been doing. And yes, Galaxia, to answer your question, you can chat in a webinar because I just got through working on that very project last week. So I know that you can chat in a webinar. So definitely sign up and participate. Sounds like a lot of fun. And for those of you who don't know, I have a Twitch channel, and I am streaming more on that than I am on YouTube these days because YouTube, right? So anyway, that's on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. I stream every Tuesday. It's just me just talking with you guys about whatever it is you want to talk about. And we got quite a little group of people who show up, a good community building there. It's called T-Cube. Tony's Twitch Tuesdays, 3 o'clock Eastern time. So feel free to join on Twitch at that time. I may start, I'm also going to be starting up streaming again in the evenings on the Clear Skies Network, but I haven't decided when exactly I'm going to start doing that. All right, guys, take it easy. Have a good weekend. Stay cool because it is hot out there. And I will be back next week with something. I'm not sure what. So thank you all so much for watching. Hans Milling, thank you for contributing to Deep Astronomy. Thank you so very much. All this money helps keep the lights on here at Deep Astronomy, which are dimming rapidly. So thank you very much. And as always, keep looking up.